So hello guys, I hope you guys are all well, having a lovely week. Tonight, Middlesex University Product Design Engineering and Design Engineering are excited to host the 12th talk in the annual guest lecture series. So this series runs weekly throughout the academic year on Thursday evenings, bringing together a vibrant mix of speakers from across the full spectrum of design and engineering. We have a mix of leading practitioners, opinion leaders, radical thinkers, and emerging talents to inspire and support your professional development. Tonight, we're delighted to host Sam Brinkley. He's a senior operations manager at ISS, and he's also an MDX-PD, Middlesex University Product Design alumni. Following his undergraduate degree in product design at Middlesex University, Sam, he continued and progressed his studies at Brunel University with a environmental-related MSc. After gaining experience through several internships, Sam was recruited by ISS, which is a facilities management company, and it's there where he now leads facilities management operations in a healthcare environment, alongside obviously leading the sustainability agenda. As usual, guys, feel free to gather your thoughts, your questions, your comments in the chat throughout the talk. We're going to have some Q&A at the end as well. And if you want to interact with Sam and go live, feel free to do that. Sam's also voluntarily offered the possibility of kind of some kind of social interaction, chat, discussion following the talk as well. So we'll be delighted if some of you guys had some time and stayed behind as well. And without any further ado, over to Sam with the talk titled Sustainability Challenges in Healthcare, Opportunities to Design Out Waste. All yours, Sam.
Thanks, Ahmed. Blimey. It sounds like I've just been introduced by Ant and Dec. So thanks for that esteemed welcome, much appreciated. So so my name's Sam Brinkley, and I've been invited here to talk to you today about about sustainability challenges in healthcare and opportunities to design out waste. So obviously you've got this picture in front of you here, and it kind of shows different types of waste that are produced in a healthcare environment. So there's probably lots of things here you'll be familiar with, anything from needles to packaging to stuff that's contaminated with blood and other bodily fluids, all that lovely stuff. Sharp spins, scissors. So in a healthcare environment, there's lots of diverse waste streams, and a lot of it is preventable. So today we're going to kind of look at some of these waste types and explore how we can design them out. While I was studying, actually, this is not something that I was looking to get into, because it's not what you would call a very trendy field. And as it's not very trendy, it means there's a big talent gap in this field. And with that comes lots of opportunities to innovate. And like I said, design out waste. So I'm going to go on to the agenda. So I'll start off with kind of introducing myself, a bit about my background, where I've come from, my journey, and where I am today. And then we'll look at the footprint of healthcare. So when I say footprint, I mean
I'm in 2 Zoom meetings on the same account, and
so we'll look at the footprint of healthcare. So anything from the environmental footprint to the numbers of employees and other bits and pieces. And then we'll look at the NHS sustainability targets. And then we'll look at opportunities for impact in the environment. And then we'll end on questions. So let's get into it then. So this is my story. So top left, school. So I finished school at the GCSE level. I was never the smartest of pupils. I finished with 7 GCSEs. So I found that school environment quite challenging. So obviously I didn't get amazing grades, but I kind of scraped through it. And then I went on to study art and design. I think I went on to do that just because I've always been quite hands-on, and I've liked making things. So I did that at college. So I studied, it was a higher national diploma for 2 years. And after that, I went to Middlesex University, as Ahmed said, to do the BA Product Design program. And what kind of captured my imagination about Middlesex was the amount of equipment they have there. So all of the incredible machines and all the workshops that you have there. It's a privilege to have those. It's a big opportunity. So that's one of the reasons I went there. And then I've always had this interest in the environment. So my last year project was it was called PASS, and it was, and I'm going to grow some of you out now. It was like a medical device which used your urine and water as a medium to grow plants with, and it was an aid so you could test yourself for diabetes. So yeah, it was quite a let's say a wild project. Anyway, on the back of that, I realized that if I wanted to get a job in the environmental field, I needed to do something more environmental related. So I went on to study environmental sciences at Brunel. And after that, I worked at Brunel for a year. So I was kind of paid to do the project, my final year project from Brunel, which was around waste and recycling in a campus environment. So I did that for a year, and then I joined ISS. So ISS is a big kind of global facilities management company who provide anything from cleaning to catering services to waste to logistics. Lots of different services they provide. Private sector, so offices, healthcare, education. So I think ISS are currently at Middlesex University, so they do the cleaning services there. So after that, I joined ISS, and one of my first roles was around healthcare, sustainability, and waste. So I was based in a hospital environment. So we were looking at how we can help segregate waste better in a hospital, so we can reduce the environmental impact and improve compliance. So actually, I really enjoyed my time in that role, and I was fortunate to win the NHS Sustainability Manager of the Year award in 2019. So after that, I was actually working at home for about a year, and that was during COVID. Now, during COVID times, as you know, it was a challenging time, and I was working from home again for a year in the times where we were only allowed to go out for half an hour a day, and that really wasn't for me. So I really like working with people. So being stuck alone in a flat isn't a very nice place to be, as I'm sure some of you are aware. So I was actually invited to be part of the founding group for the NHS Nightingale, which was London's response to the COVID-19 pandemic when it was really bad. So I was there for 6 months. So I was there from kind of day one, where the Excel Arena was just an empty shell, and then we were tasked with transforming it into an ICU, so intensive care hospital, within 5 days, for 4,000 patients. And we never really got to that many. I think we had 57 in total come through the doors. But all the same, it was an amazing experience to be part of. And I've had another couple of roles after that, and I'm currently leading an NHS mental health contract in Surrey, where I manage what we call soft services, so the cleaning, logistics, so the vehicles, portering, patient feeding, retail. So yeah, a mixture of different services. So that's me on a page. So I'll move on. So I wanted to start off by showing you, providing some context and numbers around the healthcare footprint. So in the NHS in the UK, there are 1.2 million employees. So I think they're the fourth biggest employer in the world. Just to put into context, 1.2 million is about the population of Estonia. So it's really a massive organization, and there's probably some people on the call who's either working with the NHS or no doubt related to someone who works with the NHS. So in the UK, there's 1,257 NHS hospitals. There's 700 million pounds worth of waste disposal costs. So that means just, anything that's produced as waste on site, it cost 700 million pounds to dispose of last year. In terms of the carbon emissions in the UK, so carbon emissions are like greenhouse gases, which have a damaging effect on the environment. So the NHS contributes 5.4% of the total UK emissions, which is massive, and that's the equivalent to a European country like the size of Croatia. In 2022, there were 19.6 million patients. So just in context, there's about 70 odd million people in the UK. So about a third of those attribute to the visits to a hospital last year. And finally, there's 600,000 tons of waste produced a year with the NHS as well. And I just looked this up, and it's that's equivalent to 240,000 elephants. So yeah, let's move on from that. So that just provides some context around the numbers and the scale of the NHS and what the impacts are. So because of the impact of the NHS and because of the environmental agenda, so you may have seen the COP27 recently, and everyone knows about the impact, the environmental impact that they kind of create. The NHS produced the NHS Green Plan 2020 on the back of that, so they can help reduce their emissions. And actually, they're the first health service in the world to create a green plan. So on the left here, we've got a diagram which shows you the different types of emissions. So the scope 1, as you can see, so scope 1 is from direct sources. So things like vehicles, so all of the pollutants from vehicles and the petrol, diesel, and so on that the NHS would purchase. Also the anaesthetics. So just think about the gas canisters and so on. So it's all of the emissions that are as a result of those services. And scope 2 is energy, so electricity. So just think about all the power that's used in a hospital, which is actually the biggest emitter. And then lastly, we've got the scope 3, and scope 3 includes all of the indirect emissions which are produced from the goods and services from the NHS, and part of that is the waste, which is the focus of today. So the NHS has been really bold in their target setting. So in 2020, they committed to being net zero by 2040. Now, you've probably seen a lot about net zero in that phrase on the news or just different articles. So what does it mean? So what the NHS have committed to do is reducing their emissions by 80% by 2032. So that's reducing the amount of consumption they have by 80% in the next 9 or 10 years. And the remaining 20%, they're going to it's what we call sequestration or offsetting. So essentially that means there's a lot of 20%. They'll never get down to 0% just because they're an organisation that uses energy and they produce waste and so on. So what they have to do is offset the rest, which an example of a common way to do that is to plant trees. So you'll see a lot of organisations now that are committing to net zero, but they're not actually they may not actually be reducing much in terms of footprint. They might just be planting trees or joining a organisation that does that does such. So we'll just go on to the next slide. So this is the waste hierarchy. So the waste hierarchy is it's sort of the hierarchy that shows you a top-down approach to reducing your impact through waste management. So this is like law. This is UK law. So it's part of the UK waste regulations. So at the top here, we have prevention. So an example of how we can prevent waste is going digital, so paper-free. In terms of reduction, an example of that could be reducing portion size for food, so only giving the amount that's needed. With reuse, that could be, for instance, a reusable cup, which would mean you're no longer using the paper cups for coffee, as an example. Recycling, so that means a product which is turned into something else. So for example, a bottle which could be recycled into other plastic products. And then we've got recovery, which is when you actually burn waste and you convert it into energy. So I think with the waste generated at Middlesex University, so the general waste, as an example, I don't believe it goes to landfill. It would go to energy from waste. So it's not being put in the ground. It's being burned with energy generated as a result of that. And the final one, which we need to avoid, is landfill. So the good stuff is at the top and the bad stuff is at the bottom. So so in terms of the opportunities, so the focus of this is around segregation. So so there's lots of opportunities to provide like impact into a healthcare environment by segregating waste properly. So in essence, this just means putting the right type of waste in the right bin. So if you think about a ward environment, you have you've got 5 main different types of waste bins. So you've got recycling, which includes paper cans, bottles, cardboard, and food waste, and sometimes it includes other stuff. And then you've got the general waste, which includes stuff that you can't recycle. So, but it's not medical. So things like the food packaging and non-recyclable packaging. And then you have the healthcare side, which is the orange and the tiger there. So you've got infectious waste. So what that means, it's waste that's contaminated with bodily fluids, like blood, saliva, and so on, from an infectious patient. So it could be a patient with COVID as an example, or flu. And then offensive waste is similar types of waste, so stuff that's contaminated with bodily fluids, but from a non-infectious patient. So if you think about a bandage as an example, that you may have on your arm, or a plaster from a non-infectious patient or person, that would go in there. But actually, if you look at how wards segregate waste in practice, often you'd have the infectious waste go into the recycling, or vice versa, or you might have a plastic bottle that might go into the orange bag. And there's different impacts of that. So different waste type has its own waste treatment, and therefore it's a separate cost. So for example, the infectious waste, it costs about £600 to £700 per tonne, whereas the recycling would cost about £100 per tonne. So putting the wrong type of waste in the wrong bag has a big impact on cost, and also the environment as well, because you wouldn't be recycling it. So the opportunity around this is around engagement, so and awareness. So that's one of the main reasons why waste isn't segregated properly. So yeah, if you could just have a think about any opportunities in this field around waste segregation. And then in terms of waste elimination, the focus of this is the top of the waste hierarchy. So it's things like so waste prevention, reducing waste, or reusing products. So on this slide, I've just presented some different types of products that are really widely used across the majority of hospitals, that you would find in bins. And with each product, there's an opportunity to either eliminate it through changing the product, or reducing it. So through using multiple times, or reuse. So for as an example, with the sharps bins, that sharps bin there is single use. So all of these items are single use, but there's now a like a reusable sharps bin product on the market. So so yeah, the purpose of this slide is to get you thinking around out of all of the products that are used in a healthcare environment, there's ways to reduce the impact and deliver the same service. So if we start from the left, then around 80 million single-use sharps bins are used every year, and each bin has a cost. So each bin might cost about £5. So that's a huge amount of money and cost and environmental impact for the NHS. And also there's a safety element to the sharps bins as well, because of the design of the bins, often you have sharps that kind of protrude out of the bin if they're overfilled. So so in the NHS, I think there was 100,000 sharps injuries per year, which is a huge amount, and some with quite significant consequences as well. Second left, we have the kidney dishes. So these are the types of dishes that that operating theatres would use. So they would use those to put specimens in, or surgical tools, and so on. And each one of those is single use. So as soon as it's finished with, it gets binned. And then we have scissors. So again, in a theatre environment, or it could even be in labour wards where women give birth. About 25 million pairs of scissors are used each year, and they're single use as well. So at the moment, there's barriers to cleaning them and sterilizing them and so on. Therefore, they're just binned, and they're a high quality, kind of high value item as well. And then we have walking aids. So about 112,000 of those are used every year across the UK, and actually they're supposed to be returned to the NHS once the patient's now kind of fit in walking, but actually more than half of them don't get returned. So you'll just see them kind of knocking about people's houses on the high street and so on. So there's opportunities there to reduce that number. And then we have the bottom left. So the bottom left is a blue wrap, and inside that you have different theatre instruments. So things like scissors, scalpels, everything that that would be used in kind of a surgery environment. And the blue wrap, it's used for every single patient that goes under the knife. So that's a practice that has a big environmental impact. And then we have the furniture. So as an example, in offices and in healthcare, so about 50,000 of those are purchased every year, and then 50,000 of them obviously would go into a bin. So there's opportunities there around reclaiming it, or like reusing or refurbishing the chairs to get them back into circulation. And then we have the packaging from patient meals. So many hospitals, well, all the hospitals that I'm aware of use single-use packaging for all the patient meals. And about 49 million of those packages get binned every year. So it's a huge environmental impact there. And then we have on the far right, you have a peapot. So this is for patients who are bedbound, who can't get up to go to the toilet. So these are kind of pulp peapots. This one is for a male, as you can probably gather. And about 100 million of those are used every year. So as you can see, there's a huge opportunity to prevent waste, reduce it, or reuse in some cases. So that brings us to the end. So yeah, I'd like to kind of open the floor to questions. Also, as Ahmed said at the end, at the beginning, if there's anyone who's a little bit shy and he'd rather speak in a smaller group, I'll be staying on at the end as well. So when we finished. So thanks very much, and questions.
Amazing, Sam. That was a really interesting introduction, obviously to yourself, your background, your journey, but also the footprint of healthcare and the opportunity to design out waste in obviously healthcare and the NHS as well. That was really interesting. As usual, guys, feel free to continue to gather your thoughts, your questions and comments in the chat. Make it interactive as well. If you want to go live and ask a question out on camera and via the microphone, obviously feel free to do that as well. Put a request through. Otherwise, obviously, we can always read those out and kind of put those forward to Sam. Sam, a couple of questions coming through there now. Feel free to leave the last slide up. It's a nice little placeholder for the for the video as well, if you wanted to.
Yeah.
So Sam, you know the slide that you had with the 80 million sharp bins, 10 million kidney dishes, and so forth. What would you do? You have the source for that particular information?
Sorry, just a sec. Can you see the slides okay?
That's perfect.
Do I have the sources? Yeah, I do. I can grab those if that's useful.
That'd be awesome, because some of the students, I mean, if they want to follow that up, or they, you know, kind of adding that within any research or any development or whatever, they can always obviously maybe quote the sources as well. Like there's some fascinating statistics there in terms of obviously the quantity and the volume. So on that particular note, what would you say are some of the key opportunities there in healthcare in terms of surgery rooms, hospital beds? Obviously, you've identified a few products there that obviously are utilized in large numbers. Some for good reason, obviously, single use. But in terms of materiality, in terms of materials, manufacturing, processes, what do you see the opportunities being? Either material as different use, single use? Is it more about services, updating different systems and processes?
I would say there's a massive opportunity to introduce reusables. So as an example, you've got the kidney dishes. Now, there's not many, well, I can't think of a single service out there which has reusables. So essentially it would be a, you know, just something that looks similar, that's made of a reusable product. So it could be made of a metal or more of a robust plastic that could be sterilized and obviously thoroughly cleaned and then put back into circulation. And then this similar thing in terms of the scissors as well. So often one of the blockers to introducing a reusable item is the infection prevention side. So often there's really tight restrictions around infection control in a healthcare environment. So as an example, if you so reusing a pair of scissors, a lot of people, and even though if it's washed thoroughly, a lot of infection control leads might not be too keen on reusing, even if it was kind of sterilized. So I guess the U factor, or the gross out factor, comes into play a bit as well. And I think that a lot of IPC, infection control leads in healthcare organizations can be quite risk averse at times. But actually, I think with this new green plan, that's going to drive a lot of opportunity, and it might change the perspective of that, which will bring opportunities like this. Same as with the chairs, as an example. An opportunity with furniture is again reuse or refurb. So everyone lives quite close to a hospital, and often hospitals are built relatively close together as part of the same like healthcare trust. So as an example, you have I think you've got the North Middlesex University Trust around there, and which is made up of about 4 or 5 different hospitals. But actually, a lot of the time, they're not kind of collaborating as much as they could do, and often just binning a chair or another piece of furniture is kind of an easier way to go about it. So there's an opportunity there for refurbing chairs and kind of sharing them. So whether it's to hospitals, whether it's to schools, even corporate setting, there's opportunities to kind of refurbish and relocate those assets.
Amazing. No, definitely. And what's it called? Of course, you've got the kind of argument where, you know, things like chairs in terms of reuse, recyclability is one kind of thing. And then obviously things that are used within the theatre for surgery purposes, obviously that's another kind of a ball game as well. And then you've got the infection control, and you've got the kind of sterile requirements and so forth. So that leads quite nicely onto the next question from Tony Smith, who starts by saying that he assumes that the fact that everything has to be extremely sterile makes designing reusable products a lot more difficult.
It does, yeah. So the fact that everything has to be sterile is a challenge. But one of the ways that we can kind of mitigate that is actually through using the on-site. So often hospitals have on-site sterilization facilities. So some of the stuff that's used in a theatre would be sterilized, as an example, and then reused. So there are kind of ways around it as well. And also you can use packaging as a way, even though it's creating more waste, you can use packaging as a way to keep things sterile. So food, as an example, some packaging is used to preserve the quality of and the life of food. So there are ways around it.
Amazing. And building on from that, Layla's asking a couple of questions in terms of your thoughts. So what would you say, and what type of innovation is most in demand within the healthcare sector?
What type of innovation is most in demand? So I would say, I would probably say the engagement piece. So I'll just go along to that slide. So this slide here, so in terms of the segregation, I would say if people in a healthcare environment put the right waste type into the right bin, that's kind of a low-hanging fruit, and that would create a huge impact. So perhaps one of the opportunities there is around engagement and training and increasing awareness around what's recyclable, as an example, or what type of waste would be infectious. So there's a couple of innovations around at the moment. So one of them is called like a bag to bed system, which is where instead of having a big kind of 80-litre pedal bin in a ward, you would have little mini bags, and when the nurse has to change a bandage at bedside, as an example, they would just take a small bag with them. So they would kind of segregate that waste, that bandage, the contaminated bandage at source. So it kind of reduces the likelihood of kind of mistreating waste.
Amazing. That's really interesting insights there. A second question from Layla Vidadipur is, what type of products do you think is a priority to change? And I think you've kind of presented around 8 examples of opportunities within the healthcare sector and different areas. What would you say would be some of the priorities there? Or things that perhaps are not kind of listed and proposed on this particular slide as well?
I would say the priority stuff would be the high volume, and also the cost of the production as well. So going back to that point around the 700,000 tons, sorry, 700 million pounds a year spent, that's just to dispose of the waste. It's not looking at the full, the true cost of that product. So as an example, with a sharps bin, there'll be a cost to dispose of it, but there'll also be a cost to purchase it. So if you do, if you say £5 each, that's 400 million pounds that they would, they would spend a year on sharps bins. So I would look at the, I would start with the big numbers. I would look at what would be costing the NHS the most money in procurement, so purchasing and the disposal, and that would be where I would kind of look in the first instance.
So I guess that's really interesting from obviously a business aspect, but obviously there's also the environmental aspect there as well, in terms of energy, in terms of manufacture, in terms of landfill and so forth. So in terms of the NHS, are there any kind of calculations or any statistics in that regards for any of these products?
Yeah, so so this is, it's quite, we're digging deep now. So there's a so organizations are now reporting a lot on their greenhouse gas emissions. So CO2, as an example, is a greenhouse gas emission. So depending on the size of polluter you are, so depending on how much waste you produce, how much energy you use, it's now law that you have to report back on it. So with and that's the same with waste. So going back to that that other slide, the scope 3, the indirect emissions, we would have to report on that. And each waste type has its own emission. So that they're called carbon factors. So each ton of waste has its own factor of greenhouse gases. So recycling has the lowest emission, and then you've got sharps, which isn't actually on here. So it's hazardous infectious waste, which is the highest emissions. So yeah, NHS will and other organisations will be reporting on that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's super interesting. And that leads really nicely onto Omietti Manuel's questions regarding emissions. So Omietti inquires, regarding emissions, what were the planned measures to reduce it by 80%?
So a lot of it was based on the scope 2. So scope 2 is the biggest contributor, not just for the NHS, but from other organisations as well. So again, that's kind of indirect emissions from the generation of purchased energy. So so that's the biggest contributor. In terms of a breakdown in what their plan is, I can share that with you.
Of course.
But actually, it actually depends on the NHS trust as well. So the NHS Green Plan that I've shared with you, that was produced from like the central NHS, and but it's the onus is on each individual NHS trust to produce its own plan and make its own priorities to reach that target.
Super interesting. Yeah, no. So I think we went for the low-hanging fruit, and we went deep as well into some of the emissions and so forth. And yeah, super interesting there, Sam. Another question coming in from Tony Smith, and Tony's asking some really interesting questions tonight. And this pertains to the kind of sustainability aspect of the NHS. So everyone knows that the NHS is underfunded, overcrowded, and he assumes that everything that you make for the NHS doesn't have as huge of a budget, but it has a high unit of production. So what methods do you think that you could apply to create something that's mass produced, but also relatively efficient in terms of budget precision tools. So quantity, but efficiency and low cost. But again, looking at the sustainability aspects there.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Tony, you want to go live and you want to ask the question yourself, Tony? So Tony's question, what methods do you apply to create a mass produce and budget precision tools?
Okay, so it's not, so in terms of manufacture, it's not really my area, but I can share a little bit around the procurement side with NHS. So the NHS most of the time uses what's called the NHS supply chain, like catalog. So it's just like an online catalog to purchase to purchase products. So if they need cannulas as an example, or bins for awards, or gowns and so on, they would go on this NHS supply chain catalog website, and on there you'd have different vendors. So different manufacturers would supply the NHS supply chain website. So I guess you could say they consolidate a lot of their suppliers, and with that consolidation, to give you an example, they would have, if they bought in sharp spins, they might only have 2 main suppliers for sharp spins. So they would get, with the economies of scale, that would drive down the price of the sharp spins, as an example.
100%. So super interesting. And I guess there as well, another question coming in from Shimon Fididla. Are technologies such as gamma cleaning reducing the impact enough?
Gamma cleaning, okay. It sounds like we've got an expert on the call.
On 2, actually.
Sorry?
No, that's just a follow-up joke from Shimon's comment earlier when he signed in with on 2 Zoom calls.
I wondered what happened there. So in terms of gamma cleaning, I think what you mean there is around how you kind of disinfect a room. So I think we use similar products in the company I work with.
I heard many years ago that gamma cleaning was useful for surgical tools and things, where they just put all the tools through. It's like a conveyor that goes through a gamma section, and it just kills everything on them.
Oh, right. Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure about that one. I need to do my research. Sorry, I'm not aware of that. The gamma. I know about the gamma rays. I'm not sure about that way of disinfection.
100%. On that note, though, Sam, are there any precedents in the NHS of reuse?
Yeah. So an example of reuse would be, I'll use the sharp spin example. So what some NHS hospitals have done, instead of having the single-use bins, which are here, and so with this you would fill it up with sharps, so whether it's a needle or scissors or so on, and that would go to a high temperature incineration plant, which has a super high cost, so it's about £1,000 per ton, and the whole thing gets burned. But with the reusables, it's a bin that looks kind of more robust than that, that can be cleaned. So what they would do is the waste company would take it away to their processing plant. They'd empty the contents of the bin into an incinerator, and they'd clean and sterilize the bin. So with that, that's less waste that they're burning, because they'll be like reusing the bin. So that's probably one of the most well-known examples of reuse.
Amazing.
I guess another example of reuse as well, but it's more so is the patient meals. So with the patient meals, they're often single use, but I know in some retail environments in hospitals, so like the canteen, the restaurant, often they have initiatives where you can kind of bring your own lunchbox in and fill it up, or a lunchbox is provided by the catering provider, and then they would wash it up. So there's that kind of thing that would be available for customers in kind of canteens. But perhaps an opportunity would be to look at how you can extend that to the healthcare side.
Amazing. Yeah, no, definitely. What's cool. I think, especially with things like chairs and patient meals and cutlery and so forth, things that are not obviously within the kind of operating environment and the theatres and so forth. I think obviously the NHS could perhaps be inspired by innovation and other applications from other domains that are either similar or different, like sustainability, sustainability examples from things like restaurants or the kind of hospitality sectors and so forth. I think one of the questions I wanted to follow up there is, what do you think are some of the best opportunities within the surgery environment and the theatre in terms of reuse, sustainability, environmental impact? Because again, it's a very different kind of environment to the patient room and so forth.
In terms of the theatre?
In terms of the theatre, the use of the tools, single-use tools, single-use devices.
I would say some of the medical instruments that are used. So in this theatre pack on the bottom left, in the blue wrapping, so pretty much everything in that pack is single use.
Mm-hmm.
So anything from the outer packaging to the inner packaging to the instruments inside, the majority is single use. So and one of those is used for every patient they have. So I would say that's probably the highest impact piece of equipment they would have there that you could look at potentially reusing or reducing.
Amazing. And beyond procurement and the purchasing of these particular kind of devices, products, tools from that catalogs or several different companies, is there any opportunity within the NHS for design and engineering students to actively contribute to innovation in terms of the design and innovation and engineering of products that can tackle some of these key opportunities that you've identified and beyond as well?
Absolutely. There's so much there's so much opportunity there. It's a real fertile kind of area in healthcare. So I'd probably suggest, if anyone on the call or in the wider group is interested in exploring this, maybe do some further research into the types of waste that are produced, and maybe do a separate little project around it. Just whether it's to explore reuse or how you can look at introducing a training scheme to improve segregation. And then I would just say be active. So maybe have a look at some companies that provide similar products, and don't be afraid to kind of approach them with your idea. So I'd say just try and be curious and be brave and kind of entrepreneurial with it.
Amazing. So the question there would be, ISS or the NHS, do they have any departments in terms of design, innovation, research and development?
So I think there would be with NHS England, but again, I can't really say for sure. In terms of ISS, often we use suppliers. So if we wanted to, if you wanted to buy packaging, so patient feeding food as an example, we'd use our preferred suppliers for that. So there's two suppliers that we use. So one of them is called Anglia Crown, and the other one's called Appetito. So they produce this, and I would say they're the people to go to kind of engage on different innovations with.
Amazing. Sam, I think that naturally brings us to a close. I can't see any further questions or comments in the chat. So we'll conclude by saying, obviously, Sam, thanks for taking out your time and joining us tonight. It was a really interesting, informative talk and a great Q&A session as well. And thanks for all of your input and discussions from all of us at Middlesex University, product design, design engineering. Thanks for your time and thanks for the talk.
Cool. Thanks very much. Cheers, Ahmed. Thanks, everyone.
For all of you guys, students, alumni, participants, staff, Sam's details were sent to your emails ahead of the talk, including links to his LinkedIn and the ISS website as well. So if you want to browse and connect, feel free to do so. And for all of you guys who've joined tonight, keep an eye out on your emails for the details of the speaker and the links to the next talk. Until next week, stay well, stay safe, and thank you guys.